Back to 1970, why, you're right. The amount of children born to single parents was down at the level you quoted. And almost overnight, not overnight, but within 10 years, that percentage changed to the 60% level, which you cited. Actually, it was higher than that for a while, and it settled back down around 58 to 60% of all births are single mothers. This is why in Harlem they have the baby college, because what they are trying to do is to grab these mothers at a critical point and give them 9 weeks of intense training. And that's what they're trying to do. It's a start. It's a concrete start. It is an active start. The solution here, I think, is somehow Hubert, for instance, just Hubert Ingram, Prime Minister, if he could only, or some subsequent Prime Minister, wouldn't take up the education reform as their cause. And the only way I think that will make a difference is if they associate the creation of agents of change. If their legacy is they began, and they began in a very specific and concrete way, and it was pursued. So you can't just take a school. The KIPP schools are all independent; they're privately funded, but they could be constituted under a charter school system, where yes, the Department of Education owns them, but it is let to a private firm to manage the school outside of the rules, the crippling rules of government employment, and outside of a crippling union contract. That's what would have to occur. Well, that's one possibility. The other possibility, of course, is the extensive use of vouchers, where, and what vouchers would do, a voucher is a coupon given to a public school student which can be redeemed at a private school of his choice. And what you do with vouchers is you create alternatives not existing now for students that are trapped within a failing public school system. And in all honesty, you hate to say it, despite the work of all the teachers and staff at the Department of Education, but in terms of results, they're a failing operation, and you have years, you have a record to prove it or to substantiate the claim. Yes.
In your research, have you found anything that comments or suggests there's a gap between the sexes here in terms of education? Are more boys than girls graduating from high school, or vice versa? Are more girls than boys succeeding on the BGCSE? Because it seems to me if you have a high rate of teen pregnancy, and you have a baby college, that's all fine and good, but if you have an illiterate mother, she's never going to be able to get a good paying job to support the families. The problem goes much deeper than just giving the child cognitive skills, so you still have illiterate teen parents.
No, but no, in that particular case, the child acquires more cognitive skills because the parent cares and is willing to work along the line.
But you still have the problem of them supporting the family now. You're creating a vicious cycle. So is there in the Bahamas a gap between the sexes in education?
So there's no question that the dropout rate for males in the system is rather high. I don't have a number in my head to tell you. It is substantial, and it is a real problem, and that's why the SURE program is part of what has to be done, and it can be expanded. Why it's limited to 40 males and not more, it's not clear that every teacher or most teachers in the Department of Education willingly will recommend students to enter the program. You have to have a situation where you have this resource, and it is a resource to reclaim people and to stop the problem you're talking about. But you have to. The only way that I think this thing will really make a difference is if you have to have enough demand that something substantial will be done, and you have to have You have to have politicians who say that it's in their vested interests to push this program, because what they get almost immediately is political resistance. That's the unfortunate thing. The unions buck. Unions are based on the fact that every teacher is paid a standard salary. This is what happened in the United States. You had in the United States in 1965 an Education Act that was passed, and it was passed with the idea that it would eliminate the disparities between educational situations for races within the United States. And just a ton of money, like $180 billion was spent on this program. And you got down to the year 2000, and when you looked at what was the resulting scores, test scores for students, they hadn't changed, they had an improvement. You had a tremendous increase in, and even though the facilities disadvantaged of a separate, in other words, for this act, you had facilities that were separate and not equal. But what the legislation in 1965 did over a period of time is eliminate that facilities difference. It eliminated other differences too. The question was the students any better off? And the answer was no. And why weren't they? Well, it just so happens that the year 1964 was the year that it became legal for teachers to bargain collectively. And so what happened was the National Education Association and the AFT were professional organizations before that. They didn't bargain collectively for anything. They related to the departments of education, the relevant departments of education, but they didn't bargain collectively. But with a change that occurred in 1961, actually, that took effect in 1964 in New York City, you had the first bargaining agreement for teachers. And the whole system changed. And what happened was you had 13,000 school districts in the United States were all unionized, coast to coast. And it just spread across the United States. And studies have been made of what was the impact on learning of that. And what the impact on learning in the United States is unionization, in effect, countered any increased productivity as measured by performance. And what you had was you had the Secretary of Education in 1960 able to stand up that we've spent $189 billion and we have nothing to show for it. And that was the basis for the start of the No Child Left Behind Act.
Mr. Massey, I just like to make a little bit extra restraint simply because I don't want the comment to be too far removed from the original statement. Before I do that, I'd like to thank you and Nassau Institute for putting on this event. I think that this kind of dialogue on education is much needed in the country. And it doesn't matter always if we agree on every point, but the healthy discussion is very good, and I commend you for that. But the gentleman here, you made a couple of comments that I'm a bit uneasy about, and I think we shouldn't leave unless we kind of shed a little more light on that. One comment made was that there was a deliberate attempt on behalf of politicians, I think, was a statement, to keep people uneducated. Well, I don't know.
If you don't believe that, you live in La La Land.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what would be there to substantiate it, but when you look at education in the Bahamas from the 50s on, you've seen that all of the governments, from the UBP to the first PLP to the FNF, the second PLP to this FNF now, have all made moves, positive moves toward massifying education and increasing access and opportunity. Now, we could argue about the quality of the education that was produced, but to say it was deliberate, I think, is a bit presumptuous, especially if you don't already have any concrete facts to substantiate that, because many other indicators suggest otherwise. Another thing that was said was that,
Can I just say one thing? Specifically from the 1980s when they dumbed down the system and they got rid of government right.
Exactly.
but
I mean, I think it's a lot of my grandmother, my mother.
yeah, okay, fine. See,
That's that.